we've got the whole question as we consider the supreme and the ultimate breaching the absolute wall and establishing a beachhead on the shores of infinity. We've got the whole question of where do we enter into this picture? I think we enter in. I think we should separate our thinking of quality of destiny attainment with quantity of destiny attainment. Again, I would call your attention here to a paragraph that we read. Page 1226, paragraph 14. The papers state that human beings have personalities that have 7 dimensions, and that the 7th dimension of personality is, quote, an associable absolute, and while not infinite, is dimensionally potential for sub-infinite penetration of the absolute, unquote. 1226, paragraph 14. And here's where I got the analogy about the orange juice. I can't drink all the orange juice in the city of Chicago, but that doesn't mean I can't drink some orange juice, and that I can't keep on drinking orange juice. I think in this same sense, God the Absolute is attainable in a sub-infinite sense. I think in this same sense, God the Absolute is trinitizable as a sub-infinite value. Quality is not compromised. It just isn't infinite in quantity. And you'll recall that we gave this another good hard look when we considered Havona. Here we have, I think, the best illustration of no compromise in quality, but a very definite quantitative limitation. When the Father and the Son projected Havona, and through the Spirit created Havona, they created their ideal of a universe. And we took inventory of what's in Havona. There's an awful lot in Havona that these papers don't deal with. When you get into ultimates and co-absolutes and absolute levels of existence, we don't know anything about that. This universe is a perfect universe. And the concept of perfection is not our concept. It's the concept entertained for the universal Father and the eternal Son. And that means it's perfect in all senses of all 3 floors of this firehouse. But they limited it to 1 billion worlds. They did not fill all space with Havona. Here we have qualitative perfection without limit in the presence of quantitative limitation. Havona is not an infinite universe. It's just an absolutely perfect universe. Do you see the difference between quality and quantity? Do you see how separable they are? And it's in this sense that I believe we can think logically about, number 1, the ability of the Supreme and the Ultimate to trinitize God the Absolute. This will be a sub-infinite manifestation, but not necessarily sub-absolute in quality. Sub-infinite in quantity. And in this same sense, we can get up here on the 3rd floor. We can go through this breach which they knocked down in the wall. And the mere fact that we will never have infinite capacity for comprehension of God, as do the Eternal Son and the Infinite Spirit, this does not in the least limit us from comprehending absolute deity in less than an infinite sense. What we do comprehend will be absolute quality. It just will never become infinite quantity. I think there are only 2 beings who really know God in the infinite quantitative sense. That's the Eternal Son and the Infinite Spirit. These are the only two beings in existence that have infinite capacity for comprehension. They can know God, not only as absolute quality, but also as infinite quantity. But no other being will ever thus know God. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
Listen, even in this life, you can get a feeling for it. You know, I live with a feeling of the flavor of God. Not having been raised in a church, I may impress you characters as being a very unpious guy. It's simply because my experience with God doesn't happen to flow in normal channels. I can taste the Universal Father. To me, that's a very ordinary thing. And it amazes me that most people don't have this flavor. But to me, that's just as common, an ordinary thing, as the fact that I can feel gravity acting on the mass of my body to give me the feeling of weight, you know? Just as ordinary. To me, God is just as plain and simple as dried apples and rainwater. And why make a big fuss about it? This is a normal, natural human experience. And I'm continually surprised when I find lots of people say they don't have this experience. Now, if no other human being agreed with me, I would decide I was paranoid, but I wouldn't change my conviction. I can't. I got that feeling before I ever read these papers. And I got it just before I was introduced to them. Helen wrote my mother a long letter asking her what she and Father believed. And when I started that letter, I wasn't sure. When I finished that letter, I knew, and I've known ever since. And I didn't have any cold sweat or anything else. And I can't tell you at what point in the writing the letter I discovered that I knew. It was a very calm discovery. Completely free from emotion.
Before you had never felt that?
Oh no, I've been looking. I've been doing a lot of thinking.
What you were saying?
Here. This realization was not born during the simple writing of that letter. I discovered it. It had been a borning, I suspect, for about a year before then. Young reservist knows. Now, if a guy has been in the Reserve Corps for 40, 50 years, I wouldn't want to be too sure about what he knows and doesn't know. There could be some leakage there. I'm very suspectful. But gee, I just don't know.
Training.
I'm hard at it, you know.
Individual level.
Number one, they've got a special aptitude, natural, to operate in a certain direction. Number two, they've got an appropriately experienced adjuster. In other words, if the aptitude's oratory, the adjuster's got oratorical experience, you know. Number three, they aren't hungry for glory. They're perfectly willing to serve without honor and recognition. If they're hungry for glory, it washes them out because they don't want to stay in reserve. Then, they're recruited by some method. I suspect the secondary midwares. And when they are admitted to the Reserve Corps, a secondary midware is attached to them. And it's that midware's job to see to it that they don't get knocked off accidentally, you know? Because an investment's going to be made. They're protecting their investment.
Not interference.
Right. And such a secondary midware was attached to the Apostle Andrew and wrote the first draft of the Jesus Papers. It was his job to see to it that Andrew didn't get accidentally killed for no reason at all. Not to keep Andrew from dying in the end. These reservists are then, by concerted midwear and adjuster action, they're rehearsed. I think a lot of taping is done in the superconscious level of mind. And they are assigned to the 12 departments of planetary government, which are named in the paper. You know, the Department of Religious Life, the Department of Progress, the Department of Political Nation Life.
Where are those departments? I know in the book, but I mean, where are they on the planet?
They're, I don't know, wherever the planetary capital is.
Yeah.
They have structures here that don't register on us, just like radio waves don't.
Yeah. Our planetary capital is right on here. There's not an architectural room.
No. The capital of your ranch is wherever the resident governor general is. And each of these departments has a chief. like the Secretary of State, Secretary of War, and so forth. And these reservists are divided up among these departments. And I think they give us the proportions in here. The whole thing is discussed on page 1255, you get your, starting there, you get your 12 departments. Ethical, progress, religious, nation life, races, future, enlightenment, health, home, industry, diversion, superhuman ministry. Those are the 12 departments of planetary government. And these reservists, at the time of the papers, there were 962 reservists on Earth. And they're divided into 12 groups assigned to these various departments. The smallest group was numbered 41 and the largest numbered 172. Visualize what happens when essential planetary information is conserved. You see, the Reserve Corps of Destiny is immortal. Its members are mortal. But the Corps never dies. Now let's just imagine. I want to just cut my imagination loose on paragraph 2 here and do some speculating with you. You've got an old member of the Reserve Corps of Destiny who's dying. I can easily visualize, let's say this old timer's dying in the city of Pittsburgh. And out in Denver, there is a new member of the Reserve Corps. And I can see this old timer and this new timer both asleep. And I can visualize the detachment of the two thought adjusters. And from the adjuster of the dying reservist to the adjuster of the young reservist, there flows the darndest blast of information, which is retained on the planet as a part of the essential information conserved by the Reserve Corps of Destiny. And these adjusters, I think, can communicate pretty fast. They don't commit these people unless they're in a last ditch. When you commit your reserves, you've got nothing in reserve, have you? The Reserve Corps of Destiny is the insurance policy taken out with the planetary administrators against disaster.
A person like Einstein, for instance, who had these special abilities, you say no?
I don't think he was a reservist. I think he probably had an experienced adjuster.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
That's big.
I think there are a lot of people who have aptitudes, who have experienced adjusters, and they're going to function. They're not going to be held in reserve.
Well, that's the assistance through evolution. It's the support and the spiral of evolution.
Sure. They make their contribution actively. These are insurance policies, not bank accounts. Einstein was a cultural checking account. These reservists are insurance policies. I think it's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, Einstein was a big bank account. Lincoln, I think, was a reservist.
How about Churchill? He's deeply spiritual.
Well, they say they are seldom emblazoned on the page.
Seldom. It's my considered opinion Lincoln was a reservist.
Yeah, I know it's
And he came up fast from comparative obscurity. And he moved on fast when his job was done.
There's actually no reason for his coming up the way he did.
It's a fluke. It's a fluke.
And he had to do that one job here when it...
Yes, as we discussed last night, if I were to speculate, I think Lincoln was rehearsed to do two things: end slavery and preserve the Union. He was darn good at those two things, and he did his share of bumbling in every other direction. But Marvin, nobody writes the Gettysburg Address that fast. That was taped, I think. That's a good example of the fruits of rehearsal. He just sat down and casually scribbled that thing out on some old envelopes. And you study that address, it's deathless prose. Just deathless. I don't know about Winston Churchill.
He's too active, isn't he?
Well, he was.
I don't know. I wouldn't want to say no. The cosmos. we've considered several problems. Number one, the positional value of the universe age demarcations in time. Number two, the problem of space, is it a variable or a constant? Number three, quality and quantity. Number four, the function of the second experiential trinity, the Trinity Absolute. I think that this trinity is destined to function in the cosmos infinite. It forms concurrently with the birth of the third nucleus, the master universe nucleus, the completion of the master universe. Sure, I think it's got a function within the master universe. But let's consider the first experiential trinity. It was born at the time of the completion of the second nucleus, the grand universe nucleus of the master universe. And its function extended outside of the grand universe, out in the four outer space levels. Similarly, I think this second experiential trinity has its principal function outside the master universe. This again is an argument in favor of a cosmos infinite. If this second experiential trinity could ever completely function, it would experientialize God the Absolute out of the Deity Absolute. But we got some paradoxes here. If it could completely function, then it would exhaust infinity. You can't do that. Infinity is non-exhaustible. You can get a supreme being because there are limits that you can attain. You can, with much greater effort, get an ultimate. Tennis ball and moon, you know? But even there are limits. The number of the architects of the master universe is finite. There's only 24,000. And when they've completed their work, the ultimate will appear. But when you start talking about the function of the second experiential trinity, they're dealing directly with the absolutes. And I don't think you're going to run the unqualified absolute out of gas. I think you're going to unravel this baseball that Paradise pitched to him throughout all eternity, and he's still going to have plenty of potential for more universes. I don't think you're going to run the Deity Absolute out of spirit potency. In other words, we are now attempting to exhaust the inexhaustible. And that's why I think the papers point out that God the Absolute is more apt to appear by a trinitizing act than by an experientializing victory. You follow me? That to me is the real significance of the statement. Truly doubt the possibility of the full unification of the absolute Trinity. That's the second experiential Trinity. 16, paragraph 6. We fully doubt the possibility, well, they say the ultimate Trinity is experientially unifying in completion. But we truly doubt the possibility of such full unification of the absolute Trinity. You'd have to exhaust the absolutes to do it. And they're non-exhaustible. Our concept, however, of the eternal Paradise Trinity is an ever-present reminder that deity trinitization may accomplish what is otherwise non-attainable. Hence do we postulate the sometime appearance of the supreme ultimate and the possible trinitization factualization of God the Absolute. And now if we'll go back to page 2 for a minute, I think we'll understand something better. As we consider these 7 levels of the function of total deity, don't you have a feeling that they stopped short of where they should have stopped? They stopped at ultimate. They didn't put absolute down, did they? Read the bottom paragraph. Absolute level is beginningless, endless, timeless, and spaceless. For example, on paradise, time and space are non-existent. The time-space status of paradise is absolute. This level is Trinity attained existentially by the paradise deities. But this third level of unifying deity expression is not fully unified experientially. Does that make sense now? If you could fully unify it experientially, you would have arrived at the end of experience. And that to me would be pretty awful, wouldn't it? Let's consider problem number 5. The growth of God the Absolute. When Trinitization takes place, in the full sense of the word, the Trinitizing parents give full expression to their total capacity to mobilize potentials and express them as an actual. When the Father and the Son established this principle by their original action, since they two together had infinite capacity to mobilize potentials, their Trinitized offspring was an infinite being, the infinite spirit. When two creatures, like two finalators, combine their creative attributes, remember, personality is creative, not in the unlimited sense, but in a limited sense. The thought adjuster is creative. If the two weren't creative, how would you get a soul started? This is a co-creative act on the part of personal mind and an indwelling spirit. They are co-creating something, and they are mobilizing potentials. Or, here, think of water vapor. I like that, because you can't see it at all when it's in the air. But if you chill the air, it'll condense, right? And then you can see it. I think of a creative act as condensing invisible potentials into something which is visible and registers. It was there all the time, just not apparent all the time. All right, two finalators combine their creative powers, and they reach up into universe potentials, and they trinitize a new being. It's a creative act. And what can they do? They can't do any more than their creative power permits. They cannot exceed their own limitations. All they can do is produce a being like themselves, a creature. And they can only do this once. Trinitizing parents can produce only one being who is their equal. Even God the Father and God the Son experienced this limitation. They only produced one infinite spirit. If we ever do this, we will produce just one being who is our equal, also another creature. I think this same principle applies to the supreme and the ultimate. They can't exceed their capacities, can they? Therefore, God the Absolute, as trinitized, is not a finished being. He has growth capacity, doesn't he? God the Absolute, as we have projected him here, as we've conceptualized him, is an incompleted being. He's present, but he can grow. And where is he going to grow? Well, I would offer the following possibilities to consider. in connection with the growth of God the Absolute. First of all, I think he's going to grow out in the cosmos infinite. I think he's a participant in the never-ending expansion of the beachhead on the shores of infinity. We're never going to get to the other side, but we're never going to stop expanding. I think he is going to grow also in the Trinity of Trinities. A lot of speculating about what is the Trinity of Trinities. They point out if you limit this to the concept of personal deity, then as you have the three Trinities on the first level, on the second level you have the three experiential deities. God the Supreme, God the Ultimate, and God the Absolute. Lastly, we hit something that's almost too big to think about. It's the final power-personality synthesis. This thing starts out in the concept of the conjoint creator, in whose deity nature we have the first active synthesis of personality and power. He operates right across the board. He can activate the paradise pattern. He can produce power directors. He can produce master spirits. In the spiritual side, he is the origin of mind. Here you have the maximum amount of synthesis on the existential level. Everything is functionally related to the infinite spirit. In the Supreme Being, the whole growth of the Supreme is a power personality synthesis. The evolution of sovereign power and its consolidation in a sovereign who earns that sovereignty by experience. The final victory of spirit over matter through the mediation of mind by virtue of the choosing of the volitional personality. And when the Supreme Being has emerged, we have synthesized personality and power. This universe will be a well-coordinated universe. The same synthesis is taking place on the level of ultimacy. Only the coordination of the moon is something much bigger than the coordination of the tennis ball, isn't it? How would we talk without moons and tennis balls? We gotta have, handy, corny symbols. Well, now we're face to face with a real rough one. Let's go back to the fried egg and the separation of the yolk and the white. This is unified existentially by the universal absolute. What we're face to face with here is, can it ever be unified experientially? I think the answer is no. But I think the experiential factor in such unification will be ever growing. This is a part of the growth of God the Absolute. Again, as I told you, I hope our unseen associates will give me credit for courage, if not for discretion, because I'm going on from here. The sixth question I'd like to ask you is, what is the role of the universal absolute in the final age? We're told, page 15, paragraph 4, But the universal absolute functions at the present time on the first three levels of total deity function: static, potential, and associative. This hypothesis can present the question we are considering, but it offers no speculation as to the expanded functions, if any, of the universal absolute in the final universe age. The universal censor who writes paper 10 suggests, page 116, paragraph 9, that the universal absolute is non-attainable by creatures because this absolute is growing faster than the finaliters are growing. This is something like observing a seraphim who, at triple velocity, is chasing a solitary messenger who is moving altogether faster. Let's read what the censor says. As I once sojourned in a universe where a certain group of beings taught that the finaliters in eternity were eventually to become the children of the deity absolute. That's what we're talking about, the breakthrough. But I'm unwilling to accept this solution of the mystery which enshrouds the future of the finaliters. The core of the finality embrace, among others, those mortals of time and space who have attained perfection in all that pertains to the will of God. As creatures and within the limits of creature capacity, they fully and truly know God. Having thus found God as the Father of all creatures, these finaliters must sometime begin the quest for the super-finite Father, second floor of the fire station. But this quest involves a grasp of the absonite nature of the ultimate attributes and character of the Paradise Father. Eternity will disclose whether such an attainment is possible. But we are convinced, even if the finaliters do grasp this ultimate of divinity, they will probably be unable to attain the super-ultimate levels of absolute deity. But now he hedges. It may be possible that the finaliters will partially attain the deity absolute. But even if they should, still, in the eternity of eternities, the problem of the universal absolute will continue to intrigue, mystify, baffle, and challenge the ascending and progressing finaliters, for we perceive that the unfathomability of the cosmic relationships of the universal absolute will tend to grow in proportions as the material universes and their spiritual administration continue to expand. Only infinity can disclose the Father infinite. I think then we encounter what is probably an absolute barrier. Mindful of the old censor's comments, I'm not too sure about this deity absolute business. But on the other hand, he says, maybe so, but this far and no farther. Well, I remember in the first draft of this hypothesis, I had an unfinished feeling. I think there's one more question we should ask. What is the final goal? There's no warrant in the papers for this. This is just my speculation. But I can't stop on question 6. I want to ask that last question. And here's my thinking for what it's worth. And this is strictly my thinking. So take it with much salt. The final goal would appear to be the experiential unification of the three absolutes. This goal is absolutely non-attainable. But nothing can ever stop the never-ending progression toward that goal. God the Absolute would appear to be experientially attainable by creatures as a sub-infinite experience. I think there's plenty of warrant in the papers for that deduction. The universal absolute would appear to be non-attainable by creatures. I've just read you my warrant for that deduction. But even if creatures can never attain the universal absolute, still God the Absolute could know this level of deity. Even if creatures can never know the universal Father as an infinity, still think what it could mean to an infinite God if he could be known, at least as an absolute God, by an experiential deity, by God the Absolute. You see, we really poured us a foundation.
The last three paragraphs.
And now we can begin to make some progress. The last two paragraphs on page 2 describe the firehouse. The finite, the absonite, the absolute. They point out the different ways that deity may exist. Existential, experiential, associative. God the sevenfold is not a person, is he? God the sevenfold is an association of divine beings. And then lastly, deity may be undivided, as in the Paradise Trinity. You know, the best way I've ever found to conceptualize the Trinity is to think of a tree with a single trunk and 3 branches. If you look at one level, you find undivided deity. If you look at another level, you find 3 personalizations of deity. And the unity of the Trinity does not in any way invalidate the definite reality of each of the 3 branches. Those 3 concentric circles up there are a unified single pattern, are they not? At the same time, there are 3 circles. These illustrations are really corny, but they're the only kind that mean anything to me. I just can't get any feeling out of highfalutin stuff, you know?
Right.
They now elucidate another principle, the principle of divinity. Divinity is that quality which causes all things divine to flow together, to be cohesive, to cohere. In other words, I think of divinity in that sense as like the stickum on adhesive tape. Things divine tend to stick together, flow together, come together. As we see it, well, here, when you come right down to it, what was the cohesive force that held 11 out of the 12 apostles to Jesus? It was love, wasn't it? They just thought the world of him. They loved him. There is divinity in action. And why did they love him? Because they perceived that he so dearly loved them. They define divinity as truth, as beauty, and as goodness. And as they point out many times in these papers, when you take these qualities of divinity and express them in a personality, they come out as love, mercy, and ministry. And they do this because this is the way God expressed them in the beginning. The Father is love. The Son is mercy. And what is mercy? It's defined as love applied. The Spirit is ministry. And what is ministry? It is loving mercy in action. They point out that you can have different kinds of divinity because there are different relationships to perfection. And they set forth the 7 different kinds of perfection which are characteristic in the universe. And don't get scared of that 7. It's the same pattern you encounter in the 7 master spirits. It is the permutation, the combinational possibilities of 3 kinds of perfection: imperfection, relative perfection, and absolute perfection. You can have any one alone. You can have any combination of 2. That's 3 possible combinations. Or you can have all 3 together. How would you type a human being? Well, I would say we would class on the 4th level. The thought adjuster is absolutely perfect. And in all other respects, the human being is imperfect. And if you want to think of us as just human, then we hit the 7th level. Absolute perfection in no attribute, imperfection in all. When we consider what they have to say about God, we now begin to shape our thinking in relation to the size of words. As they point out, the word God means a relationship to personality, whereas deity doesn't necessarily mean that. It may or may not. And they point out that God works, God the Father works on 3 levels: pre-personally, personally, and superpersonally. Pre-personally, he fragments. Personally, he creates. And superpersonally, he eventuates. I don't understand eventuate, and I know you folks don't either. But it means something other than fragmentation and creation, which still results in the appearance of a being. Therefore, the word symbol deity is larger than the word symbol God. The symbol deity can include the Father's relationship to paradise. He is not Father of paradise because paradise is not a son. The word symbol deity can also include the Father's relationship to the eternal Son. But if we use the word God, we are probably excluding God's relationship to paradise. And we are emphasizing the personal relationship of the Father to the Son, and with the Son to the Spirit, and to all other personal beings. They point out that as they use the word God, it can mean different things in these papers. And they say when you're in doubt, it's God the Father. But we may specify some other aspect of God, and they take inventory of how they use the word God. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, God the Supreme, God the Sevenfold, God the Ultimate, God the Absolute.